Hey everybody, it's me, John, and man, Mario's finally gone mainstream. I can't believe it. Now everyone's gonna know who this is. It isn't our gamer secret anymore. Everyone's gonna know who this character is, whereas beforehand they'd say, is it Geppetto? No, it's Mario! Anyway, the Nintendo Switch family of systems has many a Mario game, and I'm gonna list every single one of them. And if I miss just one, I will apologize profusely. Anyway, here are all the Mario games you can play on the Nintendo Switch. Let's start with the big boy, Super Mario Odyssey, the quintessential Mario game on the Switch. If you haven't played this, then you aren't living your life. Mario Odyssey is one of the best games on the Switch, and it's just so full of love. This is a sandbox Mario game in the vein of Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine, and it's best played on your own. There is a co-op mode, but this is a very personal Mario game about exploration rather than just platforming. You go around the entire world, from a dinosaur-infested cascade, to the Sand Kingdom, to the beach, to the moon. And Mario Odyssey is just so creative. When they revealed this game, they didn't show the capture mechanic where you can throw your hat on anything and become anything. That's because the game is so much more than that. It's just so fun to explore in any direction you want and make your own journey. And the mechanics, while very accessible, also have a layer of depth that make it incredibly fun to revisit and speedrun. If you've missed out on Mario Odyssey, then buddy, get a Switch, play this game, and come back to this video and say, oh, it was pretty good. Next up is a hidden gem called Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and I don't think anyone's really played this game. When this came out on Wii U, there was a total of 48 tracks, but then they decided, what if we had 48 more? And so they made the Booster Pack course consisting of tracks from previous games remade for Mario Kart 8. There's also a new battle mode with 8 new tracks, there's also a bunch of characters including crossover ones like Isabelle, and the Inkling, and Link. The base game in itself is incredibly high quality, with an amazing soundtrack, brilliant visuals, great core mechanics like anti-grav and gliders and underwater. It's just a game that's full of imagination and fun, but they've just exploded it into something else entirely. Whether you play this on your own, with friends, online, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is another must-have Switch game, and pretty much everyone already has it, but if you don't have it, then go get it. But what about 2D Mario? Well, there are two choices for you. And I guess the primary one is New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. This is a port of the Wii U game of the same name, but without the Deluxe, and it is pretty much the same game. It's your standard 2D Mario. If you've played any other game in the new series, you pretty much know what to expect. You run through grasslands, and underwater worlds, and sand worlds, and lava worlds, until you get to Bowser, and you defeat him. But it's also a very fun co-op game that you can play with up to 4 people. What makes the Switch version unique is one of the Toads in multiplayer is replaced by Toadette, who can get the Super Crown and become Peachette, who is a form of Peach that invites many, many questions. While this isn't one of the most imaginative 2D platformers on the system, it is still very enjoyable, especially with friends. But there is also Super Mario Maker 2, and this game has so much to do. Of course, in Mario Maker, you can make your own Mario levels, but even if you ignore all of that stuff, the story mode in itself is like the Switch's first proper 2D Mario game. In the story, Peach's castle is being destroyed and you've got to renovate it by earning money by completing a bunch of Nintendo-made levels. And what makes this really interesting is there's a new style of 2D Mario in here, based off 3D World. So you can make and play levels in Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, New Super Mario Bros. U, and Super Mario 3D World. And all of them have brand new mechanics and ideas that have never been in their respective games. And yeah, you can make your own levels, and making them can be just as fun as playing them, but there's also a pool of online levels that have pretty much infinite amounts to play. And you can play them with other people too, with up to 4 people online. And local too, but it's so fun to play versus against others and race towards the goal. But yeah, if you've not played Mario Maker, go ahead and do it, it's a very special game. And we spoke a bit about Mario 3D World there, so here it is, the game itself, Super Mario 3D World. This is basically a 3D Mario, but designed like a 2D one. So there's power-ups, there's an end goal, and there's co-op. But what I am underselling is the imagination behind this game. It's got so much ambition, so many ideas. In my opinion, it is one of the best Mario games ever crafted. It may start off kinda simple, but as it goes on, it introduces so much more. And this Switch version is mountains ahead of the Wii U version. The characters are faster, there's online play, there's a bunch of tweaks everywhere, and you cannot forget Bowser's Fury. Bowser's Fury is a new Mario game. It's a bundle, 3D World and this new Bowser's Fury game. It is much smaller in scope than other 3D Mario games, but it's also an entirely new idea. The entire game takes place in this one open-world hub that you explore, and you swim around a giant dinosaur, and you get all these stars, or shines I suppose they are, and it is just so full of charm. Bowser's Fury may be bite-sized, but it's one of the best Mario games ever made. I'm saying this about a bunch of games, but go and play it now. And to wrap up the 3D Mario train is Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Now technically, this game was delisted in 2021 on the eShop, but you can still very easily find it in stores in a physical version. Much like Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo, which compiled a bunch of 2D games, this compiles a bunch of 3D games. There's Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy. It's not just a compilation of those games though, as Mario 64 is actually the Shindo version, which never got released outside of Japan, so they've localized that version for the very first time, and Mario Sunshine is in widescreen for the very first time officially, and then Mario Galaxy is pretty much just Mario Galaxy, but every game is in HD now, so that's a pretty big bump. While some of the efforts may pale in contrast to what some fans are doing with these games, it's still really nice having these on the go. Playing Mario Galaxy wherever you want to, Mario Sunshine, Mario 64. For what it is, this is a pretty good collection, although missing Galaxy 2 is pretty baffling. And you know what else got delisted in March 2021? Super Mario 35. I love this game. This is in the same series as Tetris 99 and Pac-Man 99, and it's basically Super Mario Bros., apart from every time you stomp a Goomba or kick a Koopa, it'll be sent to an opponent that you're targeting, and so their screen is filled with more and more enemies, and you keep going until one player is left. It was such a good and addictive game, but it was ripped from us! If you downloaded it back when it was out, you can still boot it up, and there are still daily challenges, but you can't get into the game itself. You can't even play practice mode, it is entirely unplayable now, which is a huge loss. But this was a really good game, I promise it was good. There are 2 Mario Party games on the Switch, and the first one was Super Mario Party. This was really a return to form for the series. It does kinda lack in boards, there's only 4 of them, but the core game itself is a lot of fun. It's ditched the car mechanic from prior games, and now everyone explores on their own around the board again. This one's much more motion-orientated and feels kinda like a Wii game. Every player's got a single Joy-Con, and the minigames will do things like make you flip some meat by flipping the Joy-Con like a frying pan. And by the way, some of the best looking meat I've ever seen in a game. Very underrated meat. There's also different modes, like a game where you row a boat together, a mode where you do rhythm games, and even one where you stitch switches together to make a very interesting kinda multi-screen experience. They added online multiplayer to this game like 3 years after it came out, which was kind of surprising. And while there is a lack of boards, I do think this is a very good Mario Party game. And the other Mario Party game is Mario Party Superstars. Now this one also has a problem with a lack of boards, again there's only 4 of them, but this game is based off the series legacy. There's 4 boards that come from the original Nintendo 64 titles, and there's also 100 minigames pulled from across the entire series. There's no motion stuff in this one, this is a much more traditional button-based Mario Party game, and there's a couple of quality of life improvements, like making the game much faster and allowing you to resume and quit whenever you want to, even when you close the game, so that's awesome. Both Mario Parties serve a different need. Superstars is more nostalgic, whereas Super is a bit more original, but whatever you want, you can't go wrong with either of those. Luigi's Mansion 3 might be the best looking game on the entire system. If you've not played Luigi's Mansion before, this is very much not a platformer, and is more about exploring at a very slow pace. You go from room to room, puzzle solving and exploring to find the path forward, and there's a very light-hearted, goofy, haunted house kind of aesthetic to everything. It's beautifully animated, very polished, and just all in all a great time. Plus, there's Gooigi, who is like Luigi but made of goo, and if you want to, you can play co-op with Gooigi, but otherwise you can control Luigi and Gooigi separately. Any game with Gooigi is a good game by my merits. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker was one of the best games on Wii U, and the Switch version is surprisingly much bigger. This is another Mario game that's not a platformer. In fact, you can't jump at all in Captain Toad. Captain Toad himself is weighed down by his bag. There's no way you can jump. So you've got to explore these dioramas and collect all the stars in the level, all by just walking around. You've got to use your intuition and solve puzzles and manipulate the environment. And it is beautiful, it is fun, it is cozy, and the Switch version has so much more than the Wii U did. There's a co-op mode, there's a bunch of DLC packs with brand new levels, there's a VR mode, And one of the best Wii U games is also one of the best Switch games. Don't sleep on Captain Toad! Paper Mario: The Origami King. Now, if you follow the Paper Mario series, you probably know that most fans respect the first 3 entries a lot and find the rest of them very divisive. And even though the Origami King still has some people scratching their heads, I think it is very high above Sticker Star and Color Splash. It looks stunning, it's filled with personality, the scope is huge, and the combat system I actually quite enjoy. If you've not played Paper Mario before, they are basically Mario RPGs. It's much slower pace, there's a bunch of dialogue and battling and exploring around towns, and the Origami King in many ways is a return to form. It's definitely not going back to the standards of the first 2 games especially, but it's a great middle ground between the new and the old. There was also a very surprising duology on the Switch, being Mario plus Rabbids. Back when this was announced, it was very strange for Nintendo's Mario series and Ubisoft's Raving Rabbids to cross over with guns, but now it feels kinda normal. Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle is a turn-based strategy game where you explore these beautiful environments, but then you get into battles where you take turns to move around and strategically shoot at your opponents, which it does sound very strange, but once you get into the groove, it becomes very normal. You can play as Mario, Luigi, Yoshi, Peach, and then these Mario-ified versions of the Rabbids. It is so full of personality and charm. But then there's also Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, a much bigger and broader sequel. This one has a much larger scope and quite a different combat system too, but it's also largely based on Mario Galaxy with Lumas and a bunch more Mario Galaxy elements in there. If you ever feel that Mario is too safe and vanilla, then just play these games and it will remind you that this series can go in some very crazy directions. Kingdom Battle also has a brilliant Donkey Kong DLC. It's basically a standalone game, to be honest. It's much shorter than a core campaign, but you play as Donkey Kong and Rabbid Cranky, and still Rabbid Peach. But in my opinion, this campaign is better than the core Kingdom Battle. Do not sleep on Donkey Kong Adventure. And who can forget the Switch's second Mario Kart game, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. This comes with its own RC car with a camera on it, and you basically use the Switch as a controller. You build your own courses by placing a bunch of materials around your room or any room you want, and it creates a Mario Kart track in real time. So you're basically making your own Mario Kart track in the real world, and racing it as an RC car, but on the Switch itself, it's playing a real game of Mario Kart with AI opponents that can throw items at you, an actual finish and start lines. So it's a very experimental game, definitely not a core Mario Kart, but something that really does try something new, and is pretty exciting. Now, there are 4 Mario sports games on the Switch, and in my opinion, this first one is one of the best Mario sports games ever made, and that's Mario Tennis Aces. There is a story mode, which is pretty cool with its own unique bosses, but that's not the point of the game. This is a multiplayer game, and if you can get into the groove online or locally, there is a lot to love here. It's less about being a standard game of tennis, and more about being anime tennis, where you can slow down time and do giant dives across the board, and you've basically got to both play tennis and manage your gauge in the corner. This gauge allows you to do all your supernatural stuff. You can slow down time, you can do these super shots that can break your opponent's racket, but if you slow down time and hit just the right moment, you'll block it. There is so much depth among the already high amounts of depth in a tennis game, and it just feels like there's endless possibilities in Mario Tennis Aces. I can play this game forever. In fact, I've played this game for a long time already, but all my opponents online, they've played for thousands upon thousands of hours. All of them. The community for this game may not be loud, but they are playing silently to themselves and having a great time doing so. Don't sleep on Tennis Aces. There's also Mario Golf Super Rush. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this one. I think it's a pretty good game, but it doesn't quite reach the heights of the rest of the series. It started off with some pretty basic courses, just playing on a grassland, on a sand kingdom. But as it went on, it did introduce some pretty unique ones, like playing in New Donk City from Mario Odyssey. There's also some just Mario-themed courses that were introduced later, but it was probably a bit too late for most people who bought the game at launch. But even in its finished state, I think this one's just kind of okay. It's definitely still fun, and there's a unique optional gimmick where once you hit the ball, you run towards it, and you've got to race your opponents to where you hit the ball. So it's not just about accuracy and timing. You really have to be fast and get there as soon as you can, using the environment to your advantage, and also your abilities. Every character has their own ability. So while Super Rush may not be incredible, there's definitely still something very unique about it. And I was so happy to see this one return. This is Mario Strikers Battle League Football. I was a massive fan of this series growing up. Mario Strikers Charged on the Wii in particular took so many hours out of me. And if you've not played this franchise before, it is basically very intense football or soccer. You knock your opponents into electrified gates, it is extreme, it is intense, and Battle League is pretty in-depth. There's much more strategy than the GameCube and Wii games. You can kick the ball in front of you and speed up towards it. You can do little tricks. You can lob. You can do so much more than you could originally. And while the mechanics are a lot of fun, there is something to be said about the lack of variety though. There's no longer really different stadiums to play on, but rather you merge two themes together. So they don't play any differently. Every stadium kind of feels the exact same. And that is a pretty big downgrade compared to Charged. But this game does still do a lot right, and if you love the core gameplay, I think you'll adore this game. And plus it's done by Next Level Games, the developers behind Luigi's Mansion 3, and the animation is incredible. Look at my buddy Diddy here, look how good he looks. The last Mario sports game is Mario and Sonic at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, an event that didn't happen in 2020. If you've played any Mario and Sonic game, this one doesn't deviate from them at all really. It is very, very simple. It's your standard Wii era stuff, and you can play both with motion or buttons if you want to, but in my opinion this stuff is better with motion. You can waggle to do a 100-meter sprint, there's hurdles, there's swimming, there's all the Olympic sports you expect there to be. But this one does have a lack of dream events that kind of define the series. There's not much crossover stuff really at all, but that being said, what it lacks in the dream events, it makes up for with the story mode, where Tails and Luigi are in modern-day Tokyo, whereas Mario and Sonic have been taken to the past at the very first Olympic Games, and in the past, everything is retro. Mario is in his 8-bit sprite, Sonic's in his 16-bit sprite, and back over there, you've got these very sort of Atari-feeling Olympic Games there as well. So you've both got this very modern feeling, take on the game, and also a very retro one. I don't think it was worth sacrificing the dream events, but the story mode is a lot of fun, with some fun dialogue. It's just a very fun story about Mario and Sonic facing off against Bowser and Eggman. Now, I wasn't going to count these as Mario games, but Nintendo did, so why on earth not? Yoshi's Crafted World! The Yoshi series is a spin-off of Mario, and I'd say this is more intended for younger audiences. That said, it's still a lot of fun for everyone. It's less about just getting to the goal, and more about exploring, finding hidden gold coins, finding flowers, and the gimmick of Crafted World is you can flip the environment. It's still a 2D side-scroller, but it's working in 3D space, and you interact with the foreground and the background. And sometimes you flip things around, and so you see the foreground as the background, and the background becomes the foreground. I don't think this was as charming as Woolly World, its predecessor, but Crafted World is still a pretty good game. But the word pretty good game cannot describe Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, because this is one of my favorite games of all time. If you loved DK in the movie, do yourself a favor and pick this up immediately. Tropical Freeze is one of the most polished video games I've ever played. The soundtrack's incredible, every level is filled to the brim with ideas and concepts you've never thought of before. The camera moves everywhere, it's not just a 2D side-scroller, it is a very immersive world. I think the only weak point of this game really is the bosses. They're all a bit too long, but the actual levels themselves are incredible. Video games in their purest form. And there's also WarioWare Get It Together! If you've played a WarioWare game before, you kinda know what to expect. It's not like the Wario Land series where you just play as Wario. Instead, you've got a bunch of microgames, which are basically mini-games that you've got a couple of seconds to do. It's very rapid fire, like here's a thing, work out how to do it, solve it, move on. The gimmick of Get It Together is you play as the characters themselves, whereas prior games you just sort of did what the minigame told you to do, and worked within those circumstances. But here, you have these abilities, and that's all you have. And what makes that kind of cool is each microgame has to be tailored to everyone, and so it kind of feels different playing as each character for each microgame. And if you want to see more Mario stuff, then play 9 Volts Chapter. These are based entirely on Nintendo microgames, so there's stuff like Zelda and Pikmin, but there's also a bunch of Mario in there too. Finally, when it comes to original Mario stuff on the Switch, there is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. If you've not heard of Smash before, it is a Nintendo crossover fighter that brings together so many different franchises, from Mario to Zelda to Pokemon to Metroid to Earthbound to third-party stuff like Sonic and Metal Gear and Street Fighter and so many more. There's a ton of Mario stages, and there's a bunch of Mario characters like Mario, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, Bowser Jr., Yoshi. Rosalina, Daisy, there's so many in here. Smash is a great gateway to becoming a Nintendo fan. When I first played Smash when I was a kid, I was kind of interested in Mario and Pokemon and a little bit of Zelda, but this franchise really introduced me to everything else. I became a Metroid fan through Smash, and I hope other people have similar experiences in the modern age. And before we move on, I want to shout out a few other games that are Switch exclusive, kind of. See, one of my favorite things Nintendo's done this generation is they've preserved and re-released their arcade games, which is something they've never done before. If you know anything about Nintendo history, you will know that Mario started with Donkey Kong, but the Donkey Kong game itself has only ever really been re-released as its NES form, and the NES version is kind of a downgrade. It's lacking a stage, it's visually not as good, the sound's not as good, and the challenge isn't anywhere close. They kind of re-released Donkey Kong in Donkey Kong 64, but it was remade rather than the actual arcade game. So, for the Switch, they started re-releasing all their arcade stuff. So, Arcade Donkey Kong is fully playable on the Switch, and one of the coolest things you can do in these arcade games is put them in their vertical form. So if you're playing in handheld mode, you can tilt it like this, and all of a sudden you've got a Arcade Donkey Kong filling a vertical screen. There's also Arcade Donkey Kong Jr., which again has cutscenes that weren't in the NES version, and who can forget Arcade Mario Brothers? Now I think this one is very valuable. Like DK and DK Jr., there are cutscenes that aren't in the NES versions, but there's also a bunch of other stuff that's not in the NES versions, like a bunch of animations and enemies. In this arcade version, the shell creepers, once you hit them from below, if you don't go up and kick them, they'll jump back into their shell with their little pajama things on, whereas the NES version does not do that. There's a ton of visual and gameplay changes that really do make this arcade version quite unique. And while there are more arcade games like Punch-Out and Sky Skipper, they are not Mario themed. So, let's look at the very last arcade game, which is Versus Super Mario Bros. This is based on the NES Super Mario Bros., apart from, it just changes stuff whenever it wants to. So power-ups may not be where you expect them to be, there could just be nothing there. Sometimes they hide 1-up mushrooms, where's my 1-up mushroom? Occasionally they put enemies where you don't expect them, or change level geometry. And they also changed the warp zones, so I was expecting to go to World 8, but instead, I'm going to World 6. If you feel like you know this game inside and out, this will test you. So, those are all the Mario games you can buy on the Switch on the eShop. However, Nintendo Switch Online also has a ton of Mario. So let's look at all the Mario games that are on Switch Online, on the NES app, on the Super Nintendo app, on the N64 app, on the Game Boy app, on the GBA app. Let's look at all of them. Let's take a look. So let's start with the NES app, and we can fast forward through the arcade ones. So there's NES Donkey Kong, NES Donkey Kong Jr., NES Mario Bros., and NES Super Mario Bros. There is also Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. This was a Japan-only sequel that wasn't released in the West because it's very, very hard, and they thought we were too sensitive for such a game. And maybe they were right, because this is astonishingly hard. This introduced the Poison Mushroom, which is a power-up that will kill you if you touch it, which is not really a power-up at all. And there are a bunch of really tricky platforming challenges, which probably inspired many Mario Maker levels. Now, did you know that Super Mario Bros. 2 is actually a Japanese game called Doki Doki Panic that was reskinned as Mario 2? It's true! This let you play as not only Mario, but also Luigi, Toad, and Peach can float around like all women can. You can't stomp enemies like most Mario games, but rather you can jump on top of them, pick them up, and then throw them at another enemy. It is a very different kind of Mario game, but there's still a lot to love about Mario 2. And then Super Mario Bros. 3 brought things back to basics with a core 2D Mario platformer. You can stomp on enemies again, there's traditional power-ups. In fact, there's a ton more power-ups, like the iconic Tanuki Tail, which allows you to fly. There's now a world map, making things feel much broader and larger scale. You can ignore entire levels if you want to and just go for the goal, or you can do everything. Or you can explore and find these warp whistles that allow you to go to different parts of the world instantaneously. To many, Mario 3 is still the best Mario game ever made, and I personally hold it in a very, very high regard. The NES also had a bunch of spin-offs like Dr. Mario, a puzzle game. This is about curing viruses by matching 4 of the same color, and this is pretty special because there is no Dr. Mario game on the Switch. The Switch is one of the first Nintendo consoles not to have a Dr. Mario, and so, if you want to play them online, you can do with the NES Online service. That is pretty cool. There's also Wrecking Crew, which features Foreman Spike from the Mario movie, and this one's all about destroying everything on a level before enemies get to you. You just go bang bang bang, and then you're in the clear. NES Open Tournament is basically the first Mario Golf, and in fact it still plays a lot like a modern Mario Golf. There's definitely limitations to what the graphical capability can do, but I still find it very impressive. You've got to take the wind and the distance into account when you do your swing. It won't calculate everything for you, so you've got to think about everything before you take your shot, which a lot of modern golf games don't do, and honestly, I quite like having to think about this stuff. It may take a few rounds for you to grasp, but once you're into it, I think this can be a very, very good game in the modern era. And while that's the Mario stuff, the extended universe in NES goes even deeper. There is Yoshi on the NES, made by Game Freak, who went on to make Pokemon. This is quite a simple puzzle game where you just kind of move tiles around and get the falling piece to match with the one that's on the top of that tile. If you can get Yoshi eggs to match, you get a hatched Yoshi. Yay! But they wouldn't stop with puzzle games because then came Wario's Woods. Unlike most falling block puzzle games, you don't move the blocks themselves, but instead you play as Toad and pick them up kinda like Mario 2 and make sure that the falling ones fall onto the pieces down below. It's a very unique puzzle game and one that I still quite enjoy today. And don't worry, I didn't forget Donkey Kong 3. This is very similar to the first Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. In fact, Mario isn't in this game. Instead, you play as Stanley, and use your bug spray to first defeat the bugs that are coming down, but most importantly, keep shooting Donkey Kong. And the more you shoot him, the closer he gets to a beehive, and then you clear the level. That's kind of Donkey Kong 3, there's not much more to say. It's alright. And the final Mario Universe Mario game on Nintendo Switch Online NES is Punch-Out!, because Mario is the referee. It's definitely not a Mario game, but he is here to tell you when a player is knocked out, and when you can resume. And by the way, Punch-Out!, in my opinion, is probably the best aged NES game. It's about memorization rather than core fighting. It's more of like a rhythm puzzle game than it is a boxing game, but it is very, very good. Let's go to the next generation! On Super Nintendo, we start off with Super Mario World. Many believe that Mario Bros. 3 is still the best Mario game, and many others still believe that Mario World is still the best Mario game. This introduced Yoshi to the series, and unlike later games, as long as you can keep him, you can go to any level you want with Yoshi. There's also the cape power-up making you fly, many levels have different exits leading to secret zones. It just feels even bigger than Super Mario Bros. 3. The platforming has not aged a day, and it brought so much new to the Mario series. But what is the opposite of new? Well, that is old with Super Mario All-Stars. Unlike 3D All-Stars, this isn't simply a compilation. They actually remade every game from scratch. There's Super Mario Bros. 1, Super Mario Bros. Lost Levels, Super Mario Bros. USA being Mario 2, and lastly Super Mario Bros. 3. They've all been given a 16-bit facelift from the visuals to the audio, and the games themselves do play quite a bit differently. I'll be honest, these aren't my preferred ways to play these games, especially the first Mario. I'd much rather play that in its standard form, but it's still really cool playing 16-bit Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3. There's a lot of merit to this release. The Super Nintendo also gave us the debut of one of the biggest franchises ever, being Mario Kart, with Super Mario Kart. All the staples you've come to expect are here. There's a bunch of tracks, there's drifting, there's items, there's a battle mode. And while the perspective may be a bit tricky for some new players, it's really cool that they gave us a dual screen display, showing you both the track with turns coming up and where other players are, and also just a basic third-person view that you've come to expect from other Mario Kart games. And over in Japan on the Super Famicom was Super Mario Picross, and we've got it here on the Western NSO. This is basically just Picross with some Mario branding, but that's okay because Picross is outstanding. There's no Japanese language barrier with this one, although some of the puzzle shapes are just Japanese characters, which may get a bit lost over in the West, but still, it's a rad game. But what about the expanded universe? Well, there's Yoshi's Island, which in my opinion is still the best Yoshi game. This is one of the most beautiful games on the Super Nintendo, giving you this beautiful sort of pastel-y art style, and it meets a brilliant blend of challenge, but also relaxation. Although when it gets tough, there's nothing like the stress of hearing baby Mario crying as he flies off into the distance, and you've got to rescue him. Everything we said about the core of Crafted World applies to this one, but the original Yoshi's Island is still one of the best Super Nintendo games, whereas Crafted World, it's just kind of a pretty good Switch game. But we're including Donkey Kong games, which means the Super Nintendo has the Donkey Kong Country trilogy. These are all very iterative of each other, although if you want to play as Donkey Kong, only the first game will let you do that, DKC1. This is a Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong game, and the DKC series is much more atmospheric than Mario. You've got these brilliant sort of lifelike jungles, with more music tracks that lean into ambience. It's something much more grounded feeling than Mario. Even though they're both platformers, they have a very distinct vibe. Donkey Kong Country really isn't anything like Super Mario. Donkey Kong Country 2, on the other hand, doesn't have DK at all, but instead is Diddy and Dixie's adventure, and Dixie's able to sort of hover with her hair. DKC 2 is my favourite of that trilogy. It's a very well-made one, and instead of going into these sort of jungly vibes, it leans more into things like theme parks and pirate ships. And then finally, there's Donkey Kong Country 3, which ditches Diddy for Kiddy Kong, and it's more of a Canada adventure. You go through Canada with Kiddy and Dixie. Now, the Nintendo 64 was full of Mario games. Of course, there is Mario 64, one of the most revolutionary 3D games of all time, and it's still a ton of fun today. We talked about this a little bit during 3D All-Stars, although this version is a little bit different. It's not the Shindo version, meaning there's a bunch of glitches which many people love, which are present in this version, but not the 3D All-Stars version, and there's also no vibration. But no matter what version you play, Mario 64 is still so much fun in the modern era. If you love Odyssey or any sandbox Mario, you are going to adore this one. And Mario Kart 64 took everything that was good about the original Super Mario Kart, but amplified it. It is a little slippery to play this one today after Mario Kart 8, but still, the tracks are really great, and the battle mode is still probably the best in the series. If you can get behind the more slippery controls, I think Mario Kart 64 is still a brilliant multiplayer game, and it's great to play online via NSO. Now, Nintendo 64 Online is going to have all 3 Mario parties from the N64. Currently, though, it's just Mario Party 1 and 2. 3 is confirmed, 3 is coming, but as of right now, it's not there. So Mario Party 1 is problematic in areas. It did make some people hurt their hands by rotating the analog stick, don't put it on your palm, but it set the basis for the series to follow. There's a bunch of really iconic boards, and I just love how the characters look in this style. It's very simple, but it's kind of neat. And then Mario Party 2 took on a costume vibe, so every board in the game has different costumes for players to wear, whether it's cowboys or space. Definitely a really cool vibe and a lot of improvements over the first Mario Party, especially when it comes to balance. And while Mario Party 3 isn't here yet, again, it is on the way, so we're going to count it for now. Mario Party 3, you're kind of on the Switch. We also got a second Dr. Mario on the Switch with Dr. Mario 64, and amusingly, this is also kind of a tie-in to Wario Land. You can play as Wario, but there's also other Wario Land characters in here, and there's a full-on story mode. This is another really cool one to play online. As for whether you should play this over the NES Dr. Mario, personally I still kind of prefer the original, but 64 is a great change of pace if you've played the original a ton. Mario Sports games also really kicked off on the N64, and we've got Mario Tennis. Unlike Aces, which has a bunch of different mechanics, this is just tennis in its purest form. And it's also the game that introduced Waluigi. This gave birth to him. Wario was already a character from Mario Land 2, but Waluigi came from Mario Tennis. Even though it's kind of basic, there's still a lot of fun to be had with Mario Tennis, and again, this is one of those games you'd want to take advantage of the online features for, because it's so fun. But we also had Mario Golf, and in my opinion, this is the best Mario Golf on the system, and one of the best Mario Golfs in the franchise. They had some human characters in the early Mario Sports games, so you can play as characters like Plum alongside Mario and Luigi, and the courses are all really great. But what kind of sets this one apart from the others in my mind is there's mini golf in Mario Golf 64. I don't know why they've never brought this back before, but the mini golf is a lot of fun. But yeah, I love golf games, and Mario Golf 64 is still brilliant. Now, the last core Mario game is also a big one. This is Paper Mario. I feel like if you've watched the Mario movie and you want more of a story-heavy Mario game, this is probably one you should go for. It's definitely not very heavy, but there's a lot of light-hearted and just sort of cozy dialogue in this one, and it's just a really fun mini RPG. A lot of other RPGs at the time went for huge numbers, but Paper Mario just kinda brings it down. Doing like 5 points of damage is big in this game, and they keep it kind of entertaining, where if you press the A button when you land a hit, you get even more damage, or you can block attacks by pressing A just before it lands, so it feels more involved than many other RPGs. And to this day, Paper Mario 64 is still regarded as one of the best games in that series. But as for Extended Universe, we've got Yoshi's Story, and this one's actually a little bit divisive. Some people love Yoshi's Story, and others find it kind of boring. I think that reputation kind of came from being a 2D game during a 3D era, but even then, I don't think this comes close to Yoshi's Island. It's still a good game, but it's not one that I tend to come back to again and again and again. But still, Yoshi's Story, a pretty good game. Now we're getting towards the finish line because there's Game Boy NSO. And this is bound to explode with even more Mario games as time goes on, but right now, there's only a few. So Game Boy NSO has 3. There's Mario Land 2, which is the big one. No Mario Land 1 yet, but Mario Land 2 is such a great game. If you think about Mario theming, you probably think Grass World, Water World, Lava World. This has none of that. This is Mario exploring an entirely structured world filled with a space adventure, or one where you go through a giant mechanical Mario, or like an ant world. They are all totally different themes to what you expect from Mario. There's also a carrot power-up giving you bunny ears that let you fly, and it just kind of feels a little bit different to other Mario games. It's definitely a classic in its own right, and it introduced Wario to the series. And speaking of Wario, he became a mainstay on the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance with the Wario Land series, and while Wario Land 1 and 2 are not on NSO yet, Wario Land 3 is, and many would argue 3 is the best. Personally speaking, 4 is my favourite, but 3 is a very, very good game, full of so much charm, and it's one of the best looking games on the Game Boy Color. I will say sometimes this game can feel a bit slow on the Game Boy, because you've got to wait through some of Wario's animations if you mess up, but because of NSO, you can just rewind and not go through these animations, which I really like. And I guess the last one on the Game Boy is Game & Watch Gallery 3. Again, we're skipping 1 and 2, going straight to 3. Game & Watch Gallery would remake classic Game & Watch games with Mario characters. Some of them were Mario games originally, other ones weren't, but they've put Mario characters in regardless. And it just sort of modernizes the Game & Watch games, which were a couple of frames, and they're now much more than that on the Game Boy. And you know what? I lied! Game Boy has another Mario game, and I almost forgot! But Tetris's multiplayer features Mario and Luigi, and you can see this rather easily now because the game is online. This is something I have not done in years, so it's so cool to see Mario and Luigi in this classic version of Tetris. Finally! It's the Game Boy Advance! And again, we are missing some Mario games, but the biggest and most important ones are here already. Now, the first one is deceiving. This is Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Bros. 3. And the reason this is deceiving is it may just seem like another release of Super Mario Bros. 3, and we already had that in Mario All-Stars. But it is way more than that, because this comes with the e-reader levels. These were pretty elusive on the Game Boy Advance. Some of them weren't even released globally, some weren't even released at all. But with the NSO version, they've embedded them into the ROM, so you can play all these e-reader levels from the get-go. And the reason that's so big is because it's pretty much the GBA's original Mario game, because the GBA didn't actually have a 2D Mario platformer of its own, but these were pretty much it. Not only are there a bunch of original levels and some remakes, but they would also take mechanics across the entire Mario Advance series and combine them. So you can pluck things like Mario 2, or you can get the cape from Mario World, and there's so many different cool things that are just sort of crammed into these e-reader levels. And if you've never played them before, you must. You're basically missing out on a Mario game. We can't forget Mario Kart Super Circuit. And you know what? I never actually played this multiplayer before the Switch, but because NSO allows you to play online with friends, suddenly I can play all these games multiplayer that I never could before. And I had a lot more fun with this than I ever have. I guess one of the biggest reasons Super Circuit is quite important today is it introduced retro tracks to the Mario Kart series, bringing back every track from Super Mario Kart. And then from Mario Kart DS onwards, all games would have retro tracks, so that was pretty huge. But it kinda has the same issues as Mario Kart 64, where it's a bit slippery, and it has the issues of Super Mario Kart, where the perspective is kinda hard to judge sometimes. But still, if you grew up with this game, then I think you will love revisiting it. And then we have one more RPG! So Paper Mario isn't alone, there's also Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. These series have always been kinda similar. Mario and Luigi has quite a different comedic vibe to Paper Mario, but the combat itself has the same structure of pressing a button before a hit lands to get even more points. But the big differentiator is you play as both Mario and Luigi, and so many of your moves need both of the brothers, which are both controlled with the A button or the B button respectively. And some attacks allow you to combine both of them. Or sometimes an enemy will go for Luigi, so you gotta press B to jump rather than A. So it's just a great test of reflexes and a really fun, and sometimes surprisingly in-depth story-wise RPG. And when it comes to the extended universe, we are bound to get a lot more as time goes on, but right now, it's just the original WarioWare. Get It Together had you playing as the characters themselves, but in this one, you basically do whatever the game wants you to do. It could be anything. A lot of them are just pressing the A button, but sometimes you have to move. Sometimes you've got to shield something with an umbrella. It could be anything. And that's kind of part of the fun. It's just understanding the game as it appears and trying to learn it as soon as you can and clearing it. This is definitely one of the WarioWare games that I tend to come back to a lot, just because of the simplified fun of the original. But yeah, those are all the Mario games currently on the Nintendo Switch. That list is bound to grow, especially with NSO, but we've got a heck of a lot of them. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about all these Mario games, and if you are new, if you're coming here from the Mario movie, let us know which one you play. Because you can't go wrong. Apart from Mario 35, you can kind of go wrong with that because you can't play it. But every other one has its value and is worth playing. So thank you for watching, everyone, and we shall catch you next time. Bye! This was meant to be a quick and easy video going rapid fire through the Mario games, but it still took 40 minutes! Thanks for watching, everyone, and I really appreciate your support. We have a Patreon if you're interested in supporting us further, but if not, we would still really love it if you subscribed and stuck around for more videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time! Bye, everyone!